In the novel we recently finished, the main character, Buck, has many experiences throughout the novel. First, he lived in a beautiful California home with a judge and he thought he was the king of the valley. Until one day the judge's Mexican gardener kidnapped Buck and sells him to pay off his gambling debt to a group of dog nappers. Buck's first owner is an unnamed man in a red sweater. At first, when he was in the cage, the man in a red sweater was teasing him and finally let him out, and Buck started jumping at him and tried to kill him, but he had a club and hit Buck every time he lunged at him. Then finally Buck realized a man with a club is a man in control. He did not like him at all, but there was other dogs there that taught him to steal food when he wasn't looking. When he got sold to another sled dog group that were named Peralta and Francois. They had a dog team and the leader was named Spitz. You could tell from the beginning that Buck and Spitz wouldn't like each other. Buck's last few moments with Peralta and Francois, he killed Spitz in a death fight and was put as head dog. He was eventually sold to a new sled dog team with the names of Hal, Charles, and Mercedes. They were the worst for the dogs because they overpacked and the townspeople had to tell them to take out half of their stuff. They thought they would have enough food for 14 dogs, but when they were out there for the first couple days they had already gotten low on food. They also worked the dogs too hard because sometimes all 3 of them would be on the sleigh. One time they had to throw Mercedes off and make her walk. She did not walk, she just lied there and waited for them to turn around and get her. Eventually they wanted to go on the ice, but lots of people fell through and died. I don't know when John Thornton got in, but he wouldn't let Buck go because he knew they would fall through. So they left Buck and went, and John Thornton and Buck watched them go for the first 10 feet. Then the ice became uneven, and they fell through along with the rest of the sled dogs. John and Buck looked at each other and Buck licked John's hand and knew he was going to be the best owner he had. John had made a bet with some fellows at the bar that Buck could pull 1,000 pounds of flour along with breaking it out of the ice. At first he thought he was a fool for thinking any dog could do it, until he looked at Buck and knew that he had it in him to do it. He looked at Buck and screamed, "Mash, I think," which means go. And Buck dug his feet into the ground and ran side to side, and you could hear the ice slowly crack, and finally it breaks and Buck starts to run as fast as he possibly can and makes it to the 100-yard mark and makes John Thornton $2,000 richer. When they finally left to the dog sling the first couple nights, Buck did not take his eyes off of John just to make sure he was okay. Then finally one night he left and wanted to catch some food. He had caught plenty and was gone nearly a week and heard a wolf howl. He looked around and dashed for one particular area and seen the small wolf howling to the moon. He made a noise and it looked at him and got startled. Buck kept walking towards it, so it ran away, but Buck kept up with it, making every move it did. Then finally it realized he was no harm. So they ran and ran through the forest, and Buck realized he was gone too long and stopped. The wolf looked at him and Buck kept going. The wolf stared and stared, then Buck finally turned around and ran back to John. When he was back, John was dead with all of the dogs with the other dog owners. He seen the ats singing and dancing and he knew they killed everyone. He snapped into an incredible rage and bit the necks of a few of them, and one actually stabbed another, and they got scared and ran back into the forest. Buck chased them and killed them all. He investigated the camp and heard another howl. He ran and looked for the howl and seen a pack of wolves, and they started to snarl at him, and Buck started taking on the pack, and after half an hour they stopped and Buck sent the wolf he was running with. Then he seen a wolf which was older and looked at the moon and howled, as well did the other wolves, and Buck finally joined them. They all ran into the forest as Buck as their leader.